Hi guys, it's Mr. Brink. This is your first review for AP Environmental Science. I thought this would be a good topic to start with since this is why we're going to be out of school for at least 2 weeks due to the shutdown. So remember we did talk about stuff that endangers humans. This unit is actually part of the aquatic and terrestrial pollution part of the course syllabus for AP exam, but this topic, pathogens and infectious diseases, is something that they say is going to be on the test. So again, because this is what we're all dealing with right now, I thought this would be a good place to start. So one of the things I want you to know is pollutants can have both direct and indirect impacts on the health of organisms, including humans. Some of the things that you need to know are pathogens adapt to take advantage of new opportunities to infect and spread through human populations. So the virus right now took the advantage of being able to leap supposedly from bats in China and was able to make the leap over from bats to humans, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Specific pathogens can occur in many environments regardless of the appearance of sanitary conditions. So obviously this virus is spreading in the United States, which is typically has very good sanitary conditions because we have sewer systems and a good healthcare system and stuff like that. Next thing they want you to know is as equatorial type climate zones spread north and south to what are currently subtropical and temperate climate zones, pathogens, infectious diseases, and any associated vectors are spreading into these areas where the disease was not previously known to occur. All right, sorry about that. I had to pull up my pen for a second here. Let me try that again. All right, so what they mean by that is in the world, try and draw the best globe I can here, freehand style. There's my equator. Usually it's warm there. As that warmth spreads from the equator regions, both north and south, into subtropical regions, then those infectious diseases can spread, especially if that widens the habitat of disease carrying mosquitoes, for instance, that are vectors, or the way that a lot of these diseases get transferred. Probably the best example of that, of one I'm going to talk about on the backside, is the Zika virus that used to be found in the equatorial regions, but the past couple of years has made its way up into South Florida. So basically they want you to know that as climate change occurs and animals are able to spread their habitat to warmer areas, then those diseases that, for instance, mosquitoes are capable of transmitting may get transmitted to wider and wider areas. Next thing, poverty-stricken, low-income areas often lack the sanitary waste disposal and have contaminated drinking water supplies, leading to havens and opportunities for the spread of infectious diseases. This would be stuff like cholera or E. coli that's in our waste material that, if they're drinking contaminated waste supplies, can potentially make you sick. And then the last thing on this page is plague is a disease carried by organisms infected with the plague bacteria. So it's important to know that the plague is a bacteria. It is transferred to humans via the bite of an infected organism like a mosquito or a rat or a bat, or through contact with contaminated fluids or tissues. Let me see if I can scroll over to the next page now. Let's see. There we go. All right, so back to my pen here. These are the specific diseases that you want to know about. So tuberculosis is a bacterial infection that typically attacks the lungs. It's spread by breathing in the bacteria from the bodily fluids of an infected person. Tuberculosis used to be the #1 killer in the United States for a long period of time, but we can treat bacteria with antibiotics. So it's not a big problem anymore, except in certain countries. Forgot the I there. So antibiotics has basically gotten rid of this. In most countries, some of the poor countries where they don't have access to medical care and antibiotics, tuberculosis is still a problem. This is also a problem with people that have compromised immune systems, so especially people with HIV have typically been potentially killed by getting tuberculosis. So that's something that people with underlying conditions need to be familiar with. Malaria is still a big problem in a lot of the world. It's not a bacterial disease. It's caused by parasites, so it's a parasitic disease. and it's most often caused by bites from mosquitoes, and it's most often found in the sub-Saharan Africa region. So that's more the tropical rainforest region along the equator, where Africa or the equator goes across Africa. And again, it's a parasitic disease. It's not a big deal here, but it kills millions of people in the United States. The one we need to be familiar with living in the DFW area is the West Nile virus. It is a virus. So basically, for your pathogens that you need to be concerned with, we have the bacterial infections, parasite infections, and the virus infections. Viruses, unless you have like a flu shot, there are no antibiotics that treat that. That's like the thing that we're going through now with the COVID-19 is also a virus, so that's why there's no cure for it, but maybe one day we'll have a vaccine shot that we can get that'll help our bodies learn how to fight off these particular things. So West Nile virus is a big deal around here. That's one of the reasons they spray for mosquitoes with the pesticides sometimes when they start to catch mosquitoes that are infected with West Nile virus. Probably the biggest one that you need to know that's relevant right now is this one. It's SARS, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, which is a form of pneumonia. This is caused by viruses, so they didn't say that here, but this is a virus. And this is the one that's actually the most, has the most in common with what we're dealing with now. You don't hear this on the news, but what we're calling COVID-19 on the news is actually called SARS and then CoV-2. So the medical journals are actually calling it this. Probably the reason you don't hear it on the news right now, which is kind of interesting, is they don't want to scare the public any more than people are already scared. As you can see, going from the grocery stores, people are hoarding food and stuff like that and changing our lifestyle drastically. But what's going on right now is basically the second iteration of the SARS vaccine, okay, or the SARS virus. Okay. SARS initially started in China, just like the current one started in China too. It was also thought to come from bats, although they never totally decided that. That's where they think it came from, just like the current COVID-19 or the current SARS came from. This was in 2002, so it was about 20 years ago. And they had about 8,000 cases of this, and it was mainly in China and some of the other Asian countries as well. And they ended up with 774 deaths as a result of this virus outbreak. This was not a totally worldwide thing, but we did have some cases worldwide too. So that death rate was about 10%. So about 10% of all the people that got that virus ended up dying. Just like the current one, it's much more deadly to older people. So the SARS outbreak in 2002, you had a less than 1% chance of dying if you were 24 years of age or younger, which is kind of what we're seeing now. Oops, sorry about that. So if you're younger than that, you really didn't have much of a chance of dying unless you probably had underlying health conditions. There was a greater than 50% chance if you were 65 or older, which is kind of what we're seeing now with the current one. Is if you're older and you have underlying health conditions, this particular COVID-19, which again is really the second iteration of SARS, seems to be following kind of that same pattern. Okay. All right, the other one, the other big virus that the AP exam wants you to be familiar with is called MERS for short. It stands for Mid-East Respiratory Syndrome. This is also a virus, so they did tell you that there. It's a viral infection. Let's see if I can scroll down a little bit more here. Okay. All right, so MERS, as the name implies, started in the Middle East. It really started in Saudi Arabia. This started in about 2012. And the short name was MERS CoV. So this was also a coronavirus like the SARS was and the one we're dealing with now. All of these are coronaviruses. For this one, there's only about 2,500 cases, and they're pretty much all in the Middle East. This one was actually very deadly, though. They had 8 of the people that contracted it, they had 850 deaths. That puts the death rate at about 35%, which was really high. Luckily, they didn't have very many cases, so the number of deaths in comparison to the cases, or the number of cases we had, was pretty low, but the percentage of people that actually got this and came down with it had a very high death rate, which made it kind of scary. This one, instead of coming from bats, they think came from camels. But again, that's not totally established, but that's where they think, or scientists think it came from. The Zika virus is another one. That's the one that came up a few years ago. It caused birth defects. Probably at the time they wrote this, this was the big one on the news, which is why they put it in here. The Zika virus did not spread as bad as they thought it was going to be, but some, especially women that got it that were pregnant, led to smaller heads of babies being born and some of the problems that go along with that as well. Okay. The new one, which obviously is not going to be on the AP exam because the AP exam is already written, is the one, like I said, that we're dealing with now. The official name is SARS-CoV for coronavirus, and it's -2. Again, they're not calling it that in the news, probably to keep people from panicking over the SARS virus that happened back in 2002 that had a death rate closer to 10%. So obviously this one came about in about 2019, towards the end of 2019, and obviously now into 2020. As of this morning, I saw on the news there was 156,000 probable cases of this, which is significantly more than the other ones. But luckily the death rate is a lot lower. So as of this morning, there's about 5,600 deaths, which puts the death rate somewhere between about 2 and 3%. Which is smaller than the other outbreaks, but what has everyone worried about is how easily this thing seems to be spreading, because the number of cases has grown dramatically in the countries especially that are affected. So the Tarrant County Health Department came in and met with all the school districts in Tarrant County and said, hey, it's a good idea to shut down your schools for 2 weeks at least, so that we can try and get a hold on the spread of this thing, which is why you're now learning about the term, or probably heard on the news, the term social distancing, to keep your distance away from people that might be exposed to this. Like I said, if you're healthy and you're not older, this has really gotten way overreaction, because the chance of you dying from it is very, very small. So as a student, if you're healthy, you shouldn't have to worry about this. What all these have in common, though, is they're viral infections that affect the lungs. So as a young person, keeping your lungs healthy by not smoking and not vaping and stuff like that is obviously super, super important if you want to live a long and healthy life. And then the last thing is cholera. Again, this is mainly found in infected waters. So because we have good waste treatment systems in the United States, cholera is usually not a big problem. It is a bacterial disease, so we can cure it with antibiotics. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to learn how to get these pop up from keep popping up on me. I thought I had it contained, but maybe I don't. So cholera does sicken people. If you get it, you probably have diarrhea and throw up. It's probably not usually deadly unless, like I said, you have underlying health conditions and you don't get treatment right away, but this is a bacterial infection too. So to summarize all this up, pathogen is anything that can make you sick, right? Sorry, it's really hard to draw with this sometimes. Pathogens, we have viruses, which is what we're dealing with right now. For those, there is no cure. We do have some antivirals, and we can develop vaccines that'll keep us healthy or protected from these viruses in the future. We do have bacterial infections. These are treatable with antibiotics. And again, places that have good health systems and access to antibiotics usually don't have a problem with this because you can go to the doctor and treat this fairly easily. And then the parasite one is malaria. And that's the one that's mainly spread by mosquitoes. So people that live in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of times they'll sleep with mosquito nets around them to protect them from the mosquito bites that can transport malaria. And I'm pretty sure that it's been eradicated in most other places as well. Okay. So that's kind of my goal during the break, is to go over some of the stuff. I thought this one would be a good one to start with. So if you have any questions, you can email me. I'll post this video, and I'm going to try and do about one video a day of review stuff. Luckily for environmental science, the only big thing we have left is air pollution. So I'm hoping we can put that off and start that when we get back, because we'll still have some time, but it's a good idea to start reviewing for the AP exam now.